internet. When people first get into motorcycling, one of the biggest decisions they face is deceptively simple. What size bike should you start on? For many new riders, the temptation is strong to jump straight onto a big, powerful machine. The dream bikes they see online and in magazines are often high displacement motorcycles. Machines with huge engines, aggressive styling, and performance figures that sound incredible. But there's another path. A quieter, often underestimated route, and one that I fully endorse. Starting on a smaller motorcycle and truly mastering it. Today I'm going to explore the real difference between these two experiences. What it's like to learn on a small bike versus starting on a high displacement machine. The lessons each approach teaches, the risks involved, and why many of the world's best riders began on bikes that most people would call small. Let's begin with a common myth in motorcycling. The idea that small bikes are somehow temporary or inferior. You'll often hear new riders say things like, "I don't want to get bored in 6 months. I'll just outgrow it too quickly." Or "I'd rather start on something bigger so I don't have to upgrade." On the surface, this sounds logical, but it misunderstands something fundamental about riding motorcycles. The fact that motorcycling isn't about engine size, it's about skill, and skill takes time to build. A small motorcycle gives you something incredibly valuable that big bikes often take away, the freedom to learn without fear. When you first ride a smaller bike, something in the 125 to 350cc range, you notice something immediately. They're light, they're forgiving, and they're playful. You can throw them around corners, practice slow speed manoeuvres, experiment with body position, and even make mistakes without the bike punishing you too severely. Small bikes encourage experimentation. You're not constantly worried about accidentally unleashing a massive surge of power. You're not wrestling with hundreds of kilograms of machinery when performing a simple U-turn. Instead, the bike feels like an extension of yourself. And that's exactly what a beginner needs. Because at the start of your riding journey, you're not trying to tame horsepower. You're trying to learn balance, throttle control, braking technique, and road awareness. Confidence is one of the most important ingredients in becoming a competent rider. A smaller bike builds confidence quickly. You can practice emergency braking without fearing a violent lockup. You can practice tight turns without worrying about dropping a 250 kilogram machine. Every ride becomes a learning opportunity. Every corner becomes a chance to improve. And because the bike isn't overwhelming, your brain has the capacity to process what's happening around you: traffic, road conditions, hazards, etc. This is critical. Many new riders underestimate just how much mental processing riding requires. Now let's talk about the other path, starting on a high displacement motorcycle. For the sake of discussion, we're talking about machines in the 700 to 1000cc range or more. These bikes are incredible pieces of engineering. They're powerful, fast, and capable of performance that borders on the absurd for public roads. But for a beginner, they can be overwhelming. The first thing you notice is the weight. Many big bikes weigh well over 200 kilograms. At slow speeds, in parking lots, traffic lights, light turns, that weight becomes very noticeable. A simple mistake can turn into a drop bike very quickly, and when that happens, lifting it back up again isn't always easy. The second issue is power delivery. Large displacement motorcycles often produce large amounts of torque. Even a small twist of the throttle can send the bike surging forward far more aggressively than expected. For an experienced rider, this is thrilling. For a beginner, it can be dangerous. New riders are still developing fine throttle control. And when nerves kick in, which they inevitably do, small inputs can become jerky. On a small bike, that usually just results in a slightly clumsy ride. On a big bike, it can launch the rider into a situation they're not ready for, with them ending up on the road while the bike turns off by itself as if screaming freedom, until it too hits the tarmac, causing untold amounts of expensive damage. Here's something every rider must accept. You will make mistakes. You'll stall the bike. You'll misjudge a corner. You'll grab a bit too much front brake. It's all part of the learning process. But the consequences of those mistakes vary dramatically depending on the bike you're riding. On a small motorcycle, mistakes are usually manageable. On a big bike, those same mistakes can escalate very quickly. This is why rider training programs around the world almost always begin on smaller machines. It's not about limiting riders, it's about protecting them while they learn. Another huge advantage of smaller motorcycles is how they teach you to maintain momentum. Small bikes don't have enormous power reserves, so if you want to ride quickly, you have to focus on smooth cornering, maintaining speed through bends, precise throttle control and good braking technique. These are the exact skills that define excellent riders. Ironically, riders who master smaller bikes often become faster overall riders later on. Why is that? Because they understand the fundamentals. They're not relying on brute horsepower to compensate for sloppy technique. There's a phenomenon that happens to many riders who start on powerful motorcycles. They become dependent on the engine. Instead of refining their cornering technique, they rely on acceleration to make up for mistakes. Corner too slowly, just blast the throttle on out. Missed your braking marker, the engine will pull you out of it. But this masks poor riding habits. And those habits can become dangerous when conditions aren't perfect. Wet roads, gravel, tight bends or unexpected hazards. One certain thing is that conditions are not perfect most of the time, and sooner or later that approach will just compound the mistake and end up in a crash. Big bikes are physically more demanding. They're heavier. They often have more aggressive riding positions, and the forces involved, acceleration, braking, cornering, are much stronger. For a beginner, this can lead to fatigue much faster than expected, and fatigue leads to mistakes. Small motorcycles, by contrast, are incredibly manageable. You can ride them for hours without feeling exhausted. This means more time riding and practicing, which leads to faster improvement. Let's be honest, part of the appeal of big bikes is image. There's a cultural perception in motorcycling that bigger is better. Litre bikes, massive cruisers, powerful sport machines, these are often seen as the real motorcycles. Small bikes sometimes get dismissed as beginner toys. But ask a seasoned rider what they think. Many of them will tell you something surprising. Some of the most fun motorcycles ever built are small ones. Because fun doesn't come from horsepower alone. Fun comes from connection to the machine. When you start mastering a small motorcycle, something interesting happens. You begin to push your skills further. You start leaning more confidently into corners. You refine your braking. You experiment with body positioning. And because the bike isn't intimidating, the learning process becomes exciting rather than stressful. You start chasing smoothness, precision, flow. This is the moment when motorcycling truly becomes addictive. There is also a practical side to consider. In many countries, especially places like the UK, insurance for high-powered motorcycles can be incredibly expensive for new riders. A smaller bike often costs far less to insure. They're cheaper to buy, cheaper to maintain, and cheaper to repair if something goes wrong. For someone just entering the motorcycling arena, this can make a massive difference. How about graduating to bigger bikes? Well, here's the key point. Starting on a small bike doesn't mean staying there forever. It simply means building a foundation first. Once you've mastered throttle control, braking, cornering and road awareness, moving up to a larger motorcycle becomes far easier and much safer. Instead of feeling intimidated by the power, you'll feel in control of it, you'll respect it, and you'll know how to use it properly. Talk to riders who've been riding for decades and you'll hear a consistent theme. Many of them started on small bikes. I myself started on a 50cc moped, and we rode them hard. They learned everything they could from them, and when they finally moved up to larger machines, they were already skilled riders. That foundation stayed with them for the rest of their riding lives. Motorcycling is a lifelong journey. It's not a race to the biggest engine. It's a progression of skill, experience and confidence. Small bikes teach you how to ride. Big bikes reward riders who already know how to. Starting small doesn't make you less of a motorcyclist. In many cases, it makes you a better one. Because the riders who truly master the fundamentals early on are the ones who ride smoother, safer and faster for the rest of their lives. So if you're new to motorcycling and trying to decide where to start, ask yourself a simple question. Do you want to impress people with engine size, or do you want to become an exceptional rider? Because those two paths often begin very differently. One starts with horsepower, the other starts with mastery, and in the long run, mastery always wins. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a like and subscribe, as it helps me a lot. I'll see you next time. Keep the rubber on the road and enjoy the rest of the ride.